Alright, hello everybody. Welcome to my channel today. I'm Kevin and today we're back to our topic of biopsychology. Well, to be so precise, we're not going to talk about anything related to psychology because we are focusing on the evolution and that is just about biology alone. But of course, in the future, they also connect with how our behavior was formed. So let's just include that in the topics of biopsychology. Today we are going to talk about genes. Yes, one of the most important parts if you want to talk about biology, evolutions, and anything else that's about genes. This is the code of organisms that allow everything on this world, every living animals or even plants or not even living things to have its own structure. Of course, it has to be an organism, whether it's live on that, whether it's live or it's dead. And of course, these genes contribute a lot in forming characteristics and also forming the body shape. So, well, the first one who created the evolution theories was Darwin, but he his own self didn't understand fully about his theories. Darwin did not understand two of the key factors in which his theory was based on. He already understand the results, but he don't understand why because he didn't research deep enough to figure it out. So well, First, he did not understand why conspecifics differ from one to another. So what is conspecifics? That is the terms to represent the individuals in the same species. For example, he said, why are these two people both humans but are so different to each other? Why are they not the same? Why are they not 100% the same? For example, like that. The next point that he cannot understand is that why anatomical, physiological, and behavioral characteristics are passed down to the children by their parents. And while Darwin puzzled over these questions, an unread manuscript in his files contained the answers. It had been sent to him by the scientist, well, not a scientist, to be precise, a monk, an Augustinian monk, Gregor Mendel. Unfortunately for Darwin and for Mendel, they both died before their theories and of course their work has been recognized and praised all around the world. So today we will focus on the answer that Darwin missed when he was alive in order to completely understand how that his evolution theories work and the answer that Mendel has already given him. Mendel studied inheritance in pea plants as he always has the opportunity to plant trees in his in his place because he's a monk, so he have place so that he could blend the things he want. While Mendel doing his work blending, blending many kind of peas which include the white pea and the brown pea in his pagoda, he figured out something very, very interesting. The reason that Mandan studied the evolution and also genetics factors in pea is because he, just planned a lot of it for breakfast, dinner, lunch, and he, of course, the monks in the pagoda ate it. He made two wise decisions during his process. First, he decided to study the dichotomous trait, and he decided to begin his experiment by crossing the offerings through breeding line in order to find out the differences. You see, dichotomous traits occur in one form or other, never in combination. For better interpretation, that means seed color is, let's take an example. Seed color is a dichotomous trait. Well, it's brown or it's white. So brown and white are the colors that like a pea plant can have. A bee plant can have. So if you plant a pea tree and then it's grow up, then if it's not white color, then it's going to be brown. The seed, the pea, will going to be seed or white. So whether it's seed, the seed color are brown or white, it's not going to be a combination between brown and white. It's going to be brown or white. It's not going to be light brown or any other colors because that's the genes of the pea plant, the original plant genes. So well, that is the dichotomous trait. And well, the true breeding lines are are the breeding lines, which is like the family, a family, a species that yeah, every generation was born out to have some characteristics that has been proven to be the same. For example, Vietnamese people always born out with black hair, and that is a true breeding line because every Vietnamese will have black hair instead or except for those who love, marry, and have children with foreigners. So people from outside Vietnam, foreigners. So well, if a Vietnamese people love and have children with a Vietnamese people, then their children will absolutely have black hair because they both have black hair and the whole like every Vietnamese who live in Vietnam and who was born by Vietnamese all along have black hair except for those who their genes, somehow varied, like us. So, well, that is a true breeding line where some things like color of your hair and many other, characteristics, many other evidence that stay the same over generations. And in the pea plants, it's the color of the pea seed. So if there is a true breeding line of the brown pea, then every generation of brown pea, of pea that was reproduced by their parents will have the color of brown. And the similar thing goes with the white pea. So, well, in one of his early experiments, Mendel studies the inheritance of seed color, which related to the brown pea and the white pea. Brown or white, he began by crossbreeding the offsprings of these two true breeding lines together. And well, the offerings of this cross all have brown seeds. And then he repeat the same process with that generation. Let that generation keep, like breeding out the next generation and then keep breeding out the next generation. For example, the first generation born out the second generation, then the second generation born out the third generation, and so on. And at the third generation, he see that, well, over a quarter of the amount or the number of fees, that has been born out or has been produced have the white color, and the 3/4 of the remaining 3/4 of the offsprings have the brown color. And this is the case where the second generations of like brown pea and white pea copulate with each other, and then they grow up into the second generation. The offsprings go up into the second generation, and then they keep going and reproduce with another generation of white pea. So well, the first brown pea copulate with the first white pea, and it's produced all brown pea. And then that second generation of brown pea reproduce and copulate with no, it's not copulate. You just say is they produce the third generations by mating or connecting with the second generation of white pea. So there are those parts that you have to understand. And then at the third generation, 3/4 of the offsprings are brown and the remaining are white. So well, man then keep repeating this process until he eventually got the rules of it, and of course he have found ways to explain things so that we could know what it is trying to say. So well, first, um, one trait which Mendel called the dominant trait appeared in all of the first generation offsprings. The other trait, which he called the recessive trait, appeared in about 1/4 of the second offspring's generation. Of the second part of the third generation of offsprings. So through that, he gave out the rules. So the result of Mendelian experiment challenged the central premise on which all previous ideas about inheritance has rest. That offspring inherit the traits of their parents. Somehow, he found out that there are the rules. And of course, the recessive trait Y6 was passed on to one quarter of the second generation pea plants by the first generation pea plants that did not themselves possess it. So you see, that is to say, an organism's observable traits are referred to as its phenotype by Mendel, and the trait is that it can pass to its offspring in terms of genetic factors can be considered, can be considered as genotype. So these are things you have to understand. And Mendel devised a theory to explain his research. It comprised four ideas. First, Mendel proposed that there are two kinds of inherited factors for each dichotomous trait. For example, the brown pea and the white pea. And of course, the brown seed factor and the white seed factor control the seed color of the pea plant. Today, we call each inherited factor a gene. Second, Mendel proposed that each organism possesses two genes that will rule one characteristic. So, for example, if that characteristic is about the seed color, then there are two genes, the white genes and the brown genes in the pea plant. And of course, each pea plant possess either two brown seed genes, two white seed genes, or one of each. So, well, that means that inside an organism, they will usually control or have two genes. Yeah, in one body, we'll have two genes to rule and decide one characteristic. For example, if my hair are black, then it might be my hair genes might be black or black yellow, all right, or black blue or black brown or anything. So, well, the reason that black produce the black genes produce our black hair is very simple because they're all black, all right. But well, why that the black yellow genes still produce white hair? Sorry, black hair. All right, sorry, sorry about that. So why are they still produce black hair? So that is where the dominant terms comes in. So first, before we talk into that, we have to understand about some other words of the genetics evolution. So first, next we also have the two genes that control the same trait are called alleles. Alleles. All right. So well, alleles is the way that you will call, like a pack or a group of genes, and in Mendel theories is a group of two genes that rule one characteristic. So, well, black is an allele, black yellow is an allele, white is an allele if it's about hair color too. So, well, an allele, an allele is, is a group of two genes ruling, deciding one characteristic of an animal. So if there are two genes, you get them into one group. So that group is called allele. Alright? Now we also have the terms of homozygous. So well, homozygous are the organisms that possess two similar genes. For example, black, and that animals that can yeah, for example, me, I have the black genes, then I can be considered as a homozygous individual. So I have two black genes and they are similar to each other. That's why I have the black hair. And if I have the black hair, but my genes is not black, my allele is the contribution of black and yellow, then I cannot be considered as homozygous because homozygous is the terms to describe things in genes. The outlook might be the same, but my genes is different. If I have the black yellow hair color genes and the black color hair color genes, even when I still have black hair, but my genes inside my body they're going to be different. So that's why those the organisms that have the contribution of a dominant genes and another recessive genes, and they contribute that two factors into one allele, and they will going to be called heterozygous. So they're going to be, yeah, that term stand for the organisms that in the genes it contribute, yeah, in some characteristic in a certain, or like, yeah, in an exactly field, sorry, yeah, so in a certain field, in a certain characteristic. For example, if only the scientists looking for hair color, they only care about hair color, then they will look at the genes of the hair color, and that is how an organism can be decided if it's the heterozygous or homozygous. And if you want to talk about a person or an organism that contributes, billions of alleles, which is group of genes, then it's going to be so hard because, well, some genes are going to be homozygous and some genes are going to be, yeah, sorry, and some genes are going to be heterozygous. So, well, you see, if you want to know if something are heterozygous or homozygous, then you have to understand the field that you are looking for, the thing that you are looking for, and which characteristic that you are considering, so that you could split or decide which type of individuals an organism is. And that is the scientific terms that you need to know about Mendel theories. So, well, the third thing is that Mendel proposed that one of the two kinds of chains of each dichotomous trait will dominate each the others. So that's where the terms dominant and recessive genes appear. So, well, so for example, I have the black yellow genes and I have black hair. So the dominant genes is the black genes because it's dominant and it took over the yellow genes to appear in my head, on my head, all right? And that is how the dominant terms appeared, and that is what they explain for. Now, the third or the fourth thing is that Mendel proposed that for each dichotomous trait, each organism randomly inherits one of its father's two factors and one of its mother's two factors. So, well, that's how things work for Mendel theories. Of course, this is not all, and we will talk further into it in further videos, in other videos in the future. But well, that is just some basic knowledge that you have to know regarding about Mendel theories, and of course some scientific terms as well. So sorry for like have to looking at my notes so much today because, well, those terms are also hard for me to remember, and of course I'm trying to fix my knowledge. So, well, that's all I have to offer with you guys today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Okay, so goodbye. See you next time. Bye bye.